Welcome everyone to the March meeting for the East Brunswick Astronomy Club. If this is new to you, if this is your first meeting, welcome. We're so glad you came. You've come for a really, really good presentation. We actually had this guest presenter present for the club a couple months ago regarding her experience. And today she's here to give an update on some of her experiences as well as this new thing that she mentioned during the last presentation, which I'm sure she'll go into. This is our agenda for today. We're going through the welcome remarks right now. Then we'll switch it over to Sharifi Gassel for the presentation. We'll walk through conditions overview, just taking a look and seeing how the conditions are outside, whether it's clear, which it should be. Upcoming events at UACNJ, which we are a member club of, and upcoming events for this club, so you're in the know. We'll open it up to discussion for everyone who's here, and then we'll do some telescope observing. And as I mentioned earlier, if you were here, you caught it. The sky should be clear by the time we're done here, so we'll get to enjoy some views through a telescope. So this is our mission statement. And just to condense it for you all here, all it really says is you don't need to have any astronomy experience to attend our meetings. Some folks that have actually looked through the telescope for the very first time have been with us, which is awesome for us to experience as well as we see how they look through the eyepiece and are amazed with the craters of the moon, the rings of Saturn, and so forth. So whether you're very experienced in astronomy, have an impressive telescope, or you don't even have one, by all means, come to our meetings. We have telescopes for you to look through. All right, so tonight we have Sharifi Gassel. She is based in Central Florida near Kennedy Space Center, where space exploration is part of the local landscape. Sharifi is an analog astronaut and has completed 2 missions. The first was high seas in Hawaii as the medical officer, and the most recent was in mission control during the world's biggest analog in Vienna. This is the one she mentioned a couple months ago for the attendees of our club. Where did I leave off? She is the founder of the Blue Marble Project, has participated in 8 NASA social events, has received NASA media accreditation for several launches, and manages social media for her adopted greyhounds, reaching over 25,000 people worldwide. She is also a psychotherapist, specializing in awe-inspired therapy, anxiety, life transitions, and multicultural mental health. Her academic background includes molecular biology and microbiology, veterinary medicine, psychology, and clinical mental health counseling. Sharifi is currently pursuing a second Master of Science from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Human Factors. For fun, she enjoys kayaking, watching rocket launches, spending time with her family, and Greyhound Cosmos, and is a NAUI dive master. So without further ado, Sharifi, take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me back. It is a pleasure to be back. As Isaac said, uh, Cosmos is my adopted greyhound. While I talk here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Cosmos is behind me, and I can't quite tell if you can see him behind me with the thumbnails, but here we go. All right, so continue to share. And are we good to go with the presentation? You can see everything? Awesome. Cool. I think I got a thumbs up. So, like I said, thank you so much for having me back. If there's something, yes, perfect. Awesome. All righty. So we're going to get started. And let me minimize this. Perfect. So my talk today, I'm going to be talking about analogs to Artemis. And so starting a little bit from what an analog astronaut is. Some of you might already be familiar with kind of the nuts and bolts of it from the presentation that I had done a few months back. And for those that aren't familiar with it or kind of want to recap, I'll go ahead and go through it a little bit in the beginning and outline what an analog astronaut is, kind of the purpose of it, and what we do as analogs to then train for larger missions. And so that's where the Artemis piece comes in. I'm also a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador. similar to Isaac, and so this is kind of one of the things that we love doing is going out and talking about space and NASA missions. So, front picture you might look familiar to another picture that I had in the last presentation. This is a habitat that we lived in, a geodesic dome that was. This is not photoshopped whatsoever. It is a geodesic dome that we lived in on the side of Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. And in the back, you could see the Milky Way a little bit. There's some better pictures that I have later on with one of my crewmates. And you can spot the Pleiades over there to the right. And who knows what else. It all kind of gets jumbled in when you're in that dark of a sky. So my background originally started in molecular biology and microbiology. Absolutely loved learning about the smallest things in the cosmos and in our planet, and then switched to veterinary medicine for a little bit. Learned about animal behavior. Didn't want to be a veterinarian, and so I switched careers to psychology. And I'm also a psychotherapist. Been in private practice for about 12 to 13, going about 13 years at this point. And as Isaac said, I am an analog astronaut and I have completed 2 missions. So the first one was at high seas, which you could see pictured on the right there. Very, poetic. And the second one was just this past October, and it was part of the world's biggest analog. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that mission, and let you know what that's all about. So also a NAUI scuba diver, and also in human factors. And as of recently, I was selected to give a TED Talk. So I'll be giving a TED Talk in TEDx Orlando about a lot of my work. So if you happen to be in the Orlando area in October, come join us. And we'll be talking about some of my work and research as awe-inspired therapist, and what some of these missions actually can contribute to all of us. So, did you know, by now you probably do, there are astronauts who train right here on Earth to get ready for actually traveling to space. And so there are analog missions. What an analog astronaut is, it stands for analogous astronaut. For the most part, analog astronauts have not traveled to space. Many astronauts that have traveled to space start out as analog astronauts. There are analog astronaut habitats all over the world. There's some that are underwater, like you would see in the picture on the bottom left. And that one is called BMO. That's the name of the mission, and that's in the Aquarius habitat, which is just off the coast of the Florida Keys, which is pretty neat. It's in about 60 feet of water, so enough to simulate what it would be like to be living in isolation on, say, the International Space Station. You might think, oh, well, 60 feet of water, not that big of a deal. When you're there for an extended period of time, you would have nitrogen buildup in your system, and then you couldn't just surface to the top. Middle picture is one from my first mission at high seas, and we were about an hour away from any kind of habitat, any kind of civilization. The nearest base was an army base, and it was about, like I said, an hour away drive. There was absolutely nothing out there. Anything happens, we have an emergency number in case anything actually happens, but you're on your own, right? You're living in isolation. And the image on the right, some of you might be familiar with Chapea. It's been in the news quite probably a little bit more often than some of the other analog habitats. And this is they've just started, I believe, their second mission, and this is where the analog astronauts will be living in this habitat, which simulates Mars for a year at a time. And so they just went in a couple months ago, I believe, for a new crew for a second mission on Chapea. So that's a picture of it. So kind of give you an idea, these habitats are all over the world, right? And they could be privately owned, they could be government, they could be partnerships with both, and most, if not all of them, have a research component to them. And they test both technology and also the human factors part of it. And so human factors and psychology, meaning how do humans function within these spaces, no pun intended. So that's a little bit of an overview of what an analog astronaut is. My specific mission. Why do we do analog missions? All right, we think like, okay, this is kind of a thing. Like you go out and you play Mars or you play astronaut or something. And, for some people, it might be that fun. For other ones, we test it out because space is risky and expensive, right? Space is hard. And so before kind of investing time and effort and money and everything in technology that you don't want to really kind of put at risk, we test it here on Earth first. And so a lot of the missions that are done here on Earth test a lot of the technology. We test out what human like crew dynamics are like, teamwork, different components that help keep humans safe before actually doing the real thing in space. So, one of the things in my first mission, and what most of them do, is actually testing what it's like to live without fresh food or internet. So, these habitats don't typically grow their own food. Some of them have maybe greens. They'll grow some kind of simpler veggies, right? But we don't have kind of farms of fresh produce, and so we see what it's like to live without fresh food, without kind of having a DoorDash or an Uber Eats situation, or you grocery store, or you go just kind of run to the store and come back. You can't because you're in simulation. And the way that these work is that you would be in simulation, so you would be in the habitat for the extent of the mission. My first mission was 2 weeks long, and you can't go outside of the habitat. So you're in that geodesic dome with your crew. And you can go outside if you go on what an EVA is, so an extravehicular activity. And you can see that in the picture that's in the on the right hand side there of an EVA. And we would go through a simulated airlock, put on our spacesuits, and go out for an EVA. Some of the crew would stay inside of the habitat to make sure that there's always somebody monitoring weather and safety for safety reasons, and then the rest of the people would go out and test out what their mission would be on the EVA. Now, if you imagine what it might be like living in isolation with your crew, commonly the crews are about 4 to 6 people. So you're living in a crew without fresh food. You have obviously fresh water, but whatever you have on reserves, you're typically living off the grid. And in our mission, and I remember I mentioned this last time, we didn't have showers for 2 weeks. We had baby wipes and we had one shower in the whole mission. And that's again simulating the International Space Station. They would have like washcloths that they could use, but what is that like? What is that like to be living in about a 250 or so square foot space with five of your best friends by the end of it? And you might imagine that there's some interpersonal stuff that might come up, ways that maybe you thought you knew people and now you don't, and maybe you know them better and you come out better as better friends than you went in. You also test out how to repair things. So you can't just go to Home Depot or something and just decide to Amazon order, I don't know, something. If your hose breaks on your radio or communication or air conditioner or something, you can't just go. You have to problem solve in the moment with what you have on hand. And a lot of that involved using a lot of duct tape that we had. And so you get real creative with what you can do with duct tape. And it goes a long way. So in these kind of settings, the technology is super important, obviously, to get any of this possible, but the teamwork and the emotions are just as important, because if you have the crew that's there, you can be doing the job. If you're not doing well, if you're not mentally well, that's not going to be a very great mission for you, for anybody. All right, so what is HI-SEAS? So HI-SEAS is an acronym because space loves, abbreviations for things, for Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. So this is a picture of the crew of all six of us. There are six of us total, and two of the crewmates at the very top and on the right-hand side were from Belgium, and the rest of us were from the US and from all over. I'm from kind of primarily born and raised in Miami, but living in like near the Space Coast by Kennedy Space Center. Another one in the middle, he's over at Johnson Space Center, and he's actually a flight controller for NASA now. Have some that work for SpaceX, and a whole bunch of people, right? People from all different backgrounds, all different ages coming together for this one mission. And the mission is the thing that you really kind of focus on. So you learn how to put a lot of the differences away. And this is kind of a metaphor for all of us, right? You put any of the differences away and connect with what the main mission is and find out what you have in common to overcome some of these difficulties. So a little bit of the technical stuff from our mission. HI-SEAS could be either a Moon or Mars simulated analog mission. In our particular mission, we simulated a lunar colony, and this is a picture of it in the bottom left with the geodesic dome, the solar panels, and everything that you can see in the bottom left. We had a water reserve, and that was all the water that we had on our mission. And in the background, if you've been out to the big island of Hawaii, which is where we were at, you can see Mauna Kea and the observatories that were out there, which you can't quite see without, binoculars or a telescope or something, but they were there. And the habitat had a very small window. It had a teeny tiny window, and that was our connection to the outside world, unless we were on the EVAs. So with this also came a communication delay. So just like they would on Mars, if there was a a mission on Mars or there was a mission on the moon, there would be a little bit of a lag of communication delay. And we didn't have access to internet. That was part of the simulation. We were allowed to contact family about halfway through. We did a 15-minute phone call. And so some of this was kind of intentionally built in to see what it's like, right? To be kind of isolated for real. We did have access to email and could send, as needed, emails and messages back and forth to family. And then also the extravehicular activities that were in our analog astronaut suits. So if you see the blue suits, that was taken in one of the EVAs. And that's kind of what we did for fun and also with some of the science. So think about kind of a day and what a day would look like in a habitat. And a lot of this is similar to what a schedule might look like on the International Space Station, give or take. So the days are probably about 16 hours long, give or take. And they're not all work days. You start at about 6:30, 7:30, 7 in the morning. I would have breakfast as a crew, and you do kind of your check-in with mission control. That was for us was in Honolulu, and we would check in with mission control, do kind of a debrief of what the day was going to look like, get a recap of what the weather was going to be, and just kind of what we had planned. If our EVA that was requested would be approved, we'd be able to go out, and you get the idea. We'd go through what science experiments we would have for the day and any spacewalk simulations. So, like I said, this was a picture of another one. And, we try to be all kind of, real creative and artistic and look pretty cool because it looks like you're on Mars. We would also do about 1 to 2 hours of exercise a day, simulating similar to what they would do on the International Space Station and to prevent muscle loss and also bone loss and keep the astronauts healthy. It also helps a lot with not getting stir crazy when you're in this habitat enclosed. The end of the day, we would do debriefs and any kind of journaling that we would need, and also crew time. We always kind of built in time. Meals were all together, and that was intentional. It was time to be social and to talk about and laugh and joke around. And we would have game time at the end with physical cards, card games. We played Uno a bunch, and yeah, I'm connected as a crew. So the psychology of space is a really neat thing that is going to take off more and more the more that we kind of, with Artemis 2 now rolling out back on the launch pad in like 30 minutes or so, it's going to be starting to roll out back to launch pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center. And so as we start to develop a presence in space, a longer duration in space, then it's going to be important to maintain people's mental health and mental wellness. And that goes everything from habitat design to the crew selection and what you select, who you select as a crew, and that everybody gets along, what the mission is about. Things you should consider when doing this, if for those that are interested, is confinement. Right. Imagine being confined and our mission was 2 weeks long. Imagine if you're going to the moon. Imagine so the Artemis 2, and I'll mention this a little bit later on. The Artemis 2 mission is going to be about 10 days long, and the crew of 4 will be in the Orion capsule in the spacecraft for about 10 days together, right? And they're not exiting that. What will that do with the crew? And they seem to be an incredible, team. And it's like, how do you do that? It's very cool stuff. Also, cognitive load. If you're doing work for 16 hours a day, that you will lead to burnout real quick. So figuring out how do you balance that out? How do people manage stress? How do they have grit and resilience and also have the ability to relax, and you have, openness. You have a combination of introverted people and extroverted people, depending on the crew that is being selected. So that's interpersonal dynamics and also emotional regulation. Right? Have people how do you adapt to stress? What do you do? How do you have coping skills that you can bring with you into isolation? Something like this. So what do you think? And this is a rhetorical question, kind of given the setting. Maybe you can ask me later on or give your feedback later on. You're welcome to. What would you learn about yourself living here for weeks, months, or years? And something like this in a spacecraft, any bigger, something like that. Just rhetorical, food for thought, dehydrated food for thought. An example of, I also included a picture of our bedroom. So we were lucky enough that not all the habitats have this individual bedroom. So there were 6 of us. We each had our own bedroom. And I use that term very liberally. This was what we had on the right-hand side. And you remember that the dome, if you can see it, is a geodesic dome. So obviously this will be angled because it's on the second floor. So we had our beds that were what we had, and that's everything that we could fit inside that blue duffel bag was what we could bring on the mission. So if there were like personal photos, if there was whatever clothes you needed, that's all you would have access to for 2 weeks. And that would be similar to the weight restrictions and the size restrictions that astronauts could bring along to the ISS, which are about the size of what they could fit inside a shoebox, more or less. So, picture at the top is the 1 to 2 hours of exercise. It wasn't all on the stationary bike. That would look out, and I would purposely set the bike up to look out the one little window that we had, and it was neat. It was very cool. It was like, when else is this going to happen? And I'm like bicycling down, pretend, and down towards Mauna Kea and whatever. I don't know. Maybe I was in isolation too long, but so what do analog missions teach us? Now we're going to learn a lot about, so we have NASA spinoffs, right? You have a GPS on your phone. We have Velcro. We have eyeglass and sunglasses. Some of the eyeglasses have a coating on them that was designed for spacesuits. We have GPS that was designed for, some of the telemetry that is then applied to all of us. Those are NASA spinoffs, the technology part of it. In addition to that, we can also learn a lot from analog missions. So this particular analog was private, but NASA, as I mentioned before, has JAPIA. They also have Hera. They have a ton of them that are all kind of, testing and getting information about crew and what they can teach all of us about how to work as a team. One of the things that we learned and that I measured in my own research was how teams work under stress. Not what happens with crew dynamics, what happens with crew cohesion. That is a big thing. Also, autonomy versus decision making. Who is taking charge? Who is kind of a intrinsic motivator? Who might step up as a leader in some settings, and who might kind of take the back seat depending on the task. What happens if there's conflict? Right, people are people, and it's to be expected. Right now, hopefully nothing dramatic, and fortunately nothing happened on our missions. So, we're all friends after the fact. But that being said, what happens if something does happen? Who do you have on standby? Who is maybe a mediator? Who's trained for this? We also did have a therapist on call in case of anything, which that I'm aware of we didn't have to reach out to on our mission. That would be kind of like, and also a medical doctor in case anything did actually happen. You're living in isolation. And so we don't necessarily do this. You don't sign up, you don't volunteer to kind of be an analog astronaut just because you just like wake up one day and you decide like, I'm gonna go live outside of a volcano and see what happens and eat dehydrated food with a bunch of my strangers or whatever. So there's got to be some bigger reason why you would want to do this. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just want to see what you're capable of. Either way, there is meaning that you can pull from some of these missions, from all of these missions. And before I went into my first one, a friend of mine said, if you haven't come out different from the mission, paraphrasing, if you're not different when you step out of the habitat at the end, then you haven't done it right. All right, so something's going to change. Some of the things, and I've included an image of some of the artwork that we created. A spacesuit art, like a traveling art spacesuit that I now take on like different presentations and stuff to show the power of art and creativity on these missions. It's not just all science and technology. It's not all STEM. There is an element of STEAM in this as well, and there is the art and creativity component of this as well. So take all of that. That's a lot of information. Kind of really rush through it. So I apologize if you have any questions about specifics. Happy to answer them later on. But this is one mission. Right? This is one thing, one mission, one habitat. Now we're going to scale it bigger, much bigger. And we're going to scale it to having 16 habitats, not just the one, 16 of them. And they are all happening at the same exact time. And they are going to include over 200 people between the analog astronauts, between mission control, between educators on Earth. We're all on Earth, but Earth, air quotes, different people coordinating in different countries. There were 25 different countries participating at the same time in what is called the world's biggest analog. And so this happened in October of 2025, so this past October. And all of these missions were taking place at the same time over 2 weeks for one mission. Okay, and at the heart of it, that was the mission control, kind of coordinating the different parts of it, was MECO-V, which is Mission Control Vienna. And I'll get to that in a second. But just so you could see some of the habitats, this is obviously not all of them. There were some that were in Australia. So this is icy in Australia. And the commander from my first mission was actually on this mission, which was pretty neat. I was in mission control in Vienna, and she was an analog living in the habitat in icy in Australia during that time. So it was neat to kind of see the daily reports coming in from her and from all of them, really. There's also there were two of them that were in Jordan. There's one that was in Petra. Now, this is before going into the picture that they did. I think either before or after that they took one of them in Sam in believe Sam is in Arizona, yeah, in Tucson, Arizona, in Biosphere. And this was one analog habitat. He was living in isolation by himself for 2 weeks, and seeing what happens with him. There's also some at MDRS in Utah. There was a crew. There was a crew in Brazil. There was a crew in Portugal. There were crews, a couple of them in Africa. It was the first time that Africa was getting involved. There were some. There was one in France. There was one, yeah, all over. All over. And so they were all coming together. Now you can imagine all of these. You think, okay, well, they're different continents, time zones. How do you coordinate this? And we coordinated it here in Mission Control Vienna. So at the heart of it, we were in Mission Control Vienna was the one who was kind of like the middle ground, the mission control for all of the habitats. And a little bit complicated to kind of look at the hierarchy of it, but basically Mission Control Vienna was the heart of it, and then that would kind of delegate to the mission controls in each of the habitats. So for example, the one that I said was the one in Sam Biosphere in Arizona, they had their own mission control locally. That mission control would report to mission control in Vienna. And so we would communicate kind of like playing telephone, only a little bit better. So, you could have effective communication. If not, it would get really, really muddy with that. On the picture on the top right, you see what the operations room looked like. So this is a building that the Austrian Space Forum, the OWF, has, and they were the ones that they do this. They're a nonprofit, and they do this for those that are not familiar with the Austrian Space Forum, and they coordinate analog missions all over, right? This is what they do. And so they've obviously stepped up to do this, and they have the capacity for it, the capability for it. And so there were different rooms in this building in Vienna. This was the operations room, and there was a meteorology room. There was a media room, a science room. There are different teams in this building, and they would all kind of come together, give their information, and then on the top right, you see the different stations, the different computers. Each of these, there were different, like EarthCom, for example. That was one of the roles that EarthCom was going to be reporting to these habitats. And there's no pop quiz at the end or anything. So, point is, each of these roles had different tasks. They would all be funneled into the director of operations, who one of them was Annika Milas, and she was in the white shirt. I was her number two. So I was the operations task manager. And so between the two of us, and we would kind of disseminate information through the operations room, through mission control in Vienna, and then out to the habitats, and then back the other way. So the mission was 2 weeks long between everything. We would have kind of daily comm sets that we would check in with the different habitats. Top right in the picture, you can kind of see the little clocks in digital format, and that was to help us because they were all in different time zones. We were arriving for our shifts at like 8 a.m. Australia would be finishing up their day the day before, and so then we would get their report from the previous day already for that day. And so they were ahead of us, and then the other crews and in Utah and the States were behind us by 6 hours, and you get the idea. And so all of that was coordinated here. So we have a picture of all of us in mission control, and here, and this is actually not all of us. There were some. We did kind of a shift change about halfway through. This was everybody that was there at one time, give or take some folks. And we had media team, social media team. We had ambassadors from different countries coming in and interviewing, and just a big, it was a big thing to see what would happen. Might imagine that when all these different habitats, and think back to high seas, when you have all these little individual habitats and the missions going on at the same time, there would potentially be a lot of overlap of research. So my research involved human behavior. You can imagine that maybe there's another therapist, psychologist somewhere that would be doing similar type research in another habitat, and I would never know about it. So for the sake of redundancy, this was a very important mission. The world's biggest analog was a very important mission. So we shared all of the research into one database. So we're not kind of stepping on each other's toes and then repeating research, wasting time and money and efforts to do the same thing. All right. And so we also wanted to see what it would be like if you take not only one habitat, but scale it much bigger. And so it might simulate what it would be like living on a moon colony or a Mars colony or Earth or inner space somewhere. Some of the habitats in the world's biggest analog were simulating the moon. Some were simulating Mars. Some were living in space. They were simulating what it would be like living in space. We also had kind of one of the things that they love doing in analog missions is whoever is in charge loves throwing curveballs, and they don't tell us, but they'll like sabotage something, and it's seeing how we'll react. So we had a couple of code oranges in the world's biggest analog, and they simulated that there was a coronal mass ejection that was headed towards the moon, and so we had to come together as mission control to see what would happen, right? And so then we went into lockdown. This is all simulated, and the crew that was on the moon would get meteorology reports, and then we had to instruct them on what to do, and you get the idea on what would happen in a team, what happens. There was also another code orange where the a couple of the Martian habitats, their water filter broke, and again simulation, and some of the astronauts were getting sick, and so then we had to communicate what do we do from the medical team. We also had a couple medical doctors on staff here that were navigating that. Right. So it's seeing and what would happen for real in like a safer test area, and then taking this information and then applying it later on. So the application of analogs then kind of goes out to the real thing, right? I mean, this is a real thing, but where we're at now. And so this is a picture from obviously Artemis 1. It's not Artemis 2 quite yet. This is from the SLS, the Artemis 1 launch in 2022. And after being rolled back a few times because of hurricanes, which that's okay. We'll go out there, drive back, and then safety first. So launched on in 2022 at like 1 something in the morning, and it was unbelievable. So now we are at Artemis 2. I might be familiar with the news, kind of changing some of the plans for Artemis 2 to be expected. It happens, right? This is kind of that there are changes is a very normal thing. It's a very common thing to happen. As I said earlier, the SLS rocket for Artemis 2 will be rolled back out from the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, out to the launch pad 39B in about 20 minutes. And actually, after this presentation, I'm going to be driving out to Merritt Island to see what I can catch. And it's going to be rolled back out. It had a couple of hydrogen leaks. The rocket itself, the SLS rocket, had a couple of hydrogen leaks, which they were able to fix. They detected a helium leak, which required them to roll it back to the VAB to check it and test it. They've deemed that everything is safe. I believe I saw earlier that the astronauts, these 4, were in quarantine again. Don't quote me on that, but they'll be in quarantine for about 2 weeks. And then the scheduled launch as of now is April 1st. Can make your April Fool's jokes. So right now, that is what is planned. And the launch window is from about 6:24, I believe, to about 8:24 is the launch window. So it'll be neat if it's a daytime launch. But again, that could change. Space is hard. It happens. We want these astronauts to be safe. And so this is the first time that we have the first female launching to the moon on a lunar mission, and also the first person of color. We also have the first Canadian or non-American on one of these missions, which is pretty neat. That's historic in itself. And a lot of this is going to be continuing where Apollo left off. And some of the science and some of the technology of where our Apollo left off, Artemis will be continuing. So the physics hasn't changed of what to do, but the way in which we get there has. So the whole mission will take about 10 days or so from launch, when they launch, till they splash down, and they will be splashing down in the Pacific. About that. So I did have a video previously to a YouTube video of the SLS. So this is the SLS rocket. It does use some of the parts that were inspired and kind of taken from the space shuttle. And the SRBs, the solid rocket boosters in white on the side, might look familiar if you look at the model of the space shuttle. Similar thing. What is new to the SLS rocket is the core stage, which is what's in orange in the middle. and it's a much more powerful rocket. It can get us to the moon and back. So the very top is where the Orion capsule is. So that's where the astronauts will be. And all of this sits on top of the mobile launcher. So this mobile launcher is it's built and then it's kind of like put on the crawler. So the crawler, you kind of seen videos of the space shuttle on the crawler going from the VAB to the launch pad, launches. There you go. Same crawler modified for a new rocket, and the mobile launcher is a new design for the SLS. So typically the crawler travels at a speedy 1 mile an hour. Because this rocket is so heavy, it travels at about 0.8 miles an hour. The whole trip from the vehicle assembly building to the launch pad will take about 12 hours, give and take, depending on the speed and everything goes according to plan. So by tomorrow morning, when visitors come into Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center, they will see this beautiful thing on Launch Pad 39B. So it will sit there. I don't know if they're doing, I'm not sure if they've announced a second wet dress rehearsal. So kind of testing all of the systems. I'm sure they will at some point, and then ready for launch on April 1st. So as I said, the Orion spacecraft is where the astronauts will sit. It's a little bit bigger than the Apollo capsule. Same kind of principle with it. It has a heat shield on the bottom, which you can't quite see in this picture, but this is an actual photo that the Orion from Artemis 1 mission took. It's a selfie that it took of itself. There were no astronauts on Artemis 1. There was a robot, an astronaut simulant that his name was Munikin Campos. Yes, and he was did all the radiation testing and some of the testing the seats and everything, making sure that they're safe for the astronauts that are going to be going on Artemis 2 and beyond. Okay, so I'm going to go back to high seas and the first mission, living in kind of isolation and seeing how some of this might really start to apply. Okay, what happens in these analog environments, what happens with people, with human behavior, with human factors, with all of these things, and then applying them to something like this. Okay, you're testing life support systems. You're testing, there's no immediate rescue. So similar to an analog environment, it's living in isolation, right? There's no, once you pass a certain point, that's it, right? Past this point of no return. On Earth, you can, which is why we test on Earth, because for the real thing, you can't. There's also autonomy because beyond low Earth orbit, that's it. Right? They're on their own, and then it's up to the spacecraft and the incredible astronauts that are going to be on board. What's cool about the Orion spacecraft is that it is deep space capable, so it can actually go into deep space, and technically, it's not the plan, but this is the kind of an image of what that will look like. And this is a real picture, by the way. So here is what the orbit will look like, what the trajectory of it will look like when it leaves Kennedy Space Center. So this should play. Yeah. So launch, it's going to orbit around Earth a couple of times to pick up momentum and leave Earth's orbit. And once it reaches escape velocity, it is going all the way to the moon on a 3-day journey. And it's going to be going around the moon. It's going to be going the furthest around. It's also going to be taking a lot of pictures and doing some science, which I'll mention in a minute, heading back to Earth and then landing in the Pacific Ocean. So that is kind of what the trajectory for it will look like for Artemis 2. Each of these is going to look for Artemis 3 and beyond are going to look a little bit different. And Artemis 1 looks different also. Oops, there we go. So on board, Artemis 2, there's going to be a bunch of cool science, right? There's going to be a lot of CubeSats that are going to be on board as well, in with the rocket and different parts of it, and also in the capsule. You're also going to have some human and health biology experiments on board. There's this really, really neat device. It's called Avatar. It's a virtual astronaut tissue analog response, again, abbreviations. And it will look at organ. So there's organ tissue inside of this device, and you can see the scale of it. And the different tissue is going to be in there, and it's going to come from the astronauts that are on board, and it's going to be flown. And then they're going to study it later on to see what happened on a cellular level and see what changed. The cool thing about this particular study is that they could theoretically take this, load some tissue samples. So say like, I don't know, osteoclasts from an astronaut that has never flown, so bone cells, that have never flown, astronaut that has never flown to space, and they want to see how they'll do, right? They'll want to see like, okay, well, in order to fly this person to space, we want to see what happens to their cells before they ever fly, right? We don't want to put them at risk, or we don't want to do this or whatever. So let's test it out. Take a sample of their tissue, load it into Avatar, fly Avatar on another mission. And then when it returns, they'll study it and they'll say, okay, well, when this astronaut comes back, their cells did X, Y, and Z. And they'll be able to study a whole variety of different tissues. They'll also be able to study radiation studies with looking at the different equipment that's on board of Orion, and also what the astronauts will be wearing, and looking at what the different radiation levels are, and characterizing what that is for the safety, future astronauts. It's also going to be something called Archer, which looks kind of like a Fitbit or Apple Watch, and it's going to be monitoring their well-being and activity. So it's going to be monitoring sleep patterns. It's going to be monitoring, different like vitals that are basically going to be, on the astronauts while they are on the mission. Also, the immune biomarkers is kind of like if you imagine like litmus paper, and kind of take this absorbent paper and it has different markers on it. They'll use their own spit during the mission, put saliva or blood samples on the paper, and then be able to see how their immune system responds as a result of this mission. There's also going to be different measures. So kind of the standard measures that happen. So their vitals, their, all the basic health information for the astronauts that's going to help them function and learn more about what happens to the humans before we actually land. So we have some challenges, you might imagine. This is an illustration. Obviously, this is not the real thing the Blue Origin, the Blue Moon lander, which is kind of up for bid right now, for seeing who it is that's going to have like the first lander and then the habitat and et cetera. So this is kind of a concept art of Blue Moon. So some challenges to think of: the distance from Earth. Right? We think like, okay, well, it's not that far; it's only the moon, but I think really it is, right. It's a thing. It's a different atmosphere, like thin, not even really an atmosphere on the moon. How is that going to affect the astronauts and when we land? Confinement. What's it going to be like in confinement, and either on in habitats or in the spacecraft getting there? Crew trust, so trusting one another, having the crew, which I think they're doing an incredible job of, with that. Decision making under pressure. I know that they go through all the contingencies ahead of time as best as they can, and working the problem. Still, this is new, so there will be stuff that comes up, and then psychological resilience. So all of these things sound familiar to what analog missions can teach us, which is why we study them. So the next steps, and actually before I go then, I will actually add that I've also been helping out with the Austrian Space Forum as part of their human factors team after the world's biggest analog. They're currently in the selection process for their next team, their next class of analog astronauts, and the selection of that. So joined the human factors team. We ran them through a battery of about 7 or so psychological assessments. This is not including all the medical and all of the administrative assessments. Also did one-on-one interviews with about 32 of the finalists, narrowing it down to about 15 during this week, and interviewing them, right, and getting a sense of who it is that they're applying, why they're applying, learning more about them, and everything. So this is something that's always going on, right? And it's neat to kind of be on the other side in the selection part of it now, and kind of putting some of this into practice. So getting back to Artemis, as I said, Artemis 1 launched 2022. And you have the mission logo, mission patch for Artemis 1, Artemis 2 mission patch. Love it. It's very cool. Slated to launch April 1st, 2026. I kind of left it vague in case it does change. The launch windows, you can probably just Google and find them on NASA's website and like when they'll change. I think if it doesn't go April 1st, it'll be April 3rd through 6th. So, keep an eye out. And if you happen to be down here, obviously go see it if you can. You can probably see it and feel it and hear it from anywhere in the state. And, very powerful rocket. Artemis 3, which is just to the right, they haven't announced the mission patch quite yet, but this is something that just recently Jared Isaacman, the NASA administrator, added a mission to the Artemis program. And this will be in 2027, where they're going to test. Originally, Artemis 3 was slated to land on the surface, They added one in between. So Artemis 3 will actually be testing some docking around the moon. So they're going to send up parts and then test docking, the docking system. And then Artemis 4 will be the landing, which as of now is scheduled for 2028. The cadence after Artemis, and that is a typo. Apologies. That should say Artemis 5, late 2028. And the cadence of it after Artemis 3 is guesstimated to be about every 10 to 12 months. They want to send a rocket up. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, that could change with commercial partners jumping into this and, and everything. So that is where we're at with that. This is my website and a QR code. If anyone has any questions later on, you think of something, feel free to visit my website, email me, whatever. And photo that I took of the moon. I don't even remember when, but through my sea star. And yeah, it's unfortunately cloudy here, so I won't be getting any imaging in tonight. But here it's clear for you all. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, answer any questions that you might have. And yeah, let's see, there's someone actually that wrote something in the chat. Let's see, when I was young in the 90s, there was a lot of discussion in the scientific community about building a habitat on the moon or Mars, then the shuttle was defunded. How much closer are we to a longer term mission and temporary residence on non-Earth body in space? And what is the likelihood of actually achieving the goal in that timeline? That is a fantastic question. Based on the commercial partners and based on where the different partnerships are coming, I would say we're definitely closer. There is a lot, the capability is there to land. It's introducing the human element of it, and that seems to be kind of depending on what conferences you go to or whatever. It's seeing that we can do it. We've done it on Mars. We have robots on Mars, right? For how long? So there is that. It's a matter of how do you get the people part thriving and surviving and everything on the moon or Mars or beyond. The timeline, your guess is as good as mine. Obviously want to make sure that everybody is safe before doing it and that we're ready before doing it. So any other questions?
Thank you for such a great talk. I have many questions, but I'll start with one. So in these habitats on Earth, do you also simulate the conditions, like environmental conditions or gravity conditions, which you might face on Moon or Mars? So that's a big component, which I don't know if you simulate or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So human spaceflight analogs, that's kind of the umbrella term for it. And now that I'm on a bigger screen, you might notice behind me is Cosmos, who is my puppy. He's just going to
Yeah.
lay there. Not related.
Okay.
Anyway, they have, so in part of the Austrian Space Forum, they have what's called a vertical treadmill. That is just one of many, and this is actually in Innsbruck. ESA, so the European Space Agency, uses this specific one. It's just one that popped in my head, and that is meant to simulate lunar gravity, or depending on whatever setting. There are some analog human spaceflight analogs that are meant to simulate like no movement, and so they have bed rest studies where there are some that are kind of put in a pool and then they're floating for a month or something. There's it all depends, but absolutely there are. Yeah, and there's also hyperbaric chambers that NASA has. That's one of the ones that I'm actually interviewing for in the process now. Is going into a hyperbaric chamber, changing the pressure and seeing how cognitive functioning is affected, because very much so that is a thing. Gravity, you can only do so much. They have the neutral buoyancy lab for at NASA, and also doing the underwater analog missions that test the closest that you can get to space. So I've been told, which simulates microgravity.
Thank you. My other question is that you are a molecular biologist as well as you're a psychologist. So which of these skills do help you the most on these missions?
Great question. So I went in with doing psychology research, and my initial study was studying awe and wonder and what would happen as a result of this. And that's what a lot of the information that'll be in the TED Talk in October is, the findings of that and kind of what that is. So I went in with that. There was also a huge component where there was one of my crewmates in the first missions that was actually a microbiologist, and that was his research, was microbiology. Because of my background, I was able to help him out in that component. The incubator was not working because space is hard. That's what analogs are, is to test things. The incubator was not working. He had to grow, his agar was not solidifying, and then the colonies weren't growing, and then we had fungus growing, and so trying to brainstorm from that background was pretty neat to do. Right. And so a lot of the people that are selected for these have multiple career paths, multiple interests, multiple, academic, whatever. And so you kind of pick and pull depending on where you're needed and in that. So a little bit of both, men in mostly with psychology, threw in some micro in there as well.
In the meantime, I'd like to ask, was there ever a code orange that maybe made you roll your eyes or was like, are you kidding me? Was there a code orange that was so outrageous that you were left with that reaction?
Not really. I mean, we really took it seriously, and it was they were fun, not like entertaining, haha. Like they were fun after the fact. It was like this rush of something. Um, there was nothing about it. So the first one that the water filter broke, a lot of it was like scrambling to figure out, wait, what are we doing? Who does what? And like trying to get our bearings. The director of the Austrian Space Forum would come in and he like would present the information and then we'd have to go with it, and so it was a neat to do it. One of the things that is interesting when you do one of these analogs is after about second day or so, maybe not even that long, you really start to feel like it's real, which is wild. And I think by the second day living in high seas, you really start to feel like you're living on the moon, and it's just bizarre. I mean, you're not like delusional, but you really start to kind of get into it and get into the simulation. So that it's not real, but that's part of it.
Thank you. It's a nice presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Before you embark on this analog machine, analogs, you said people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, they participate. Do you receive any coaching yourself before actually going into the mission?
Any questions?
Any training or
Oh,
coaching before you
yeah,
enter into the...
absolutely. Absolutely. So it all kind of depends on the mission and who is hosting. So the one that I can speak to right now of they all go through background checks of some sort, psychological assessments, medical testing, and everything to make sure that everybody is actually safe before going. It all depends. So the first time that I met the crew for my first mission, we hadn't met in person ever. And what we had done is done a couple of Zoom calls to get to know one another. And that was basically it. We did do some team building exercises ahead of time. We climbed a mountain literally. Then one morning they just woke us up and like have a lunch packed, 6 a.m., meet us here. We didn't know why. We climbed a mountain. Like you could see the different roles of the people coming out. And what we're doing now with training the next class of analogs for the Austrian Space Forum, it's a whole thing where there are intensive like survival training. There are different stress tests that you do ahead of time before even being selected, to really get a sense of who is going to be on these teams, because you want that ahead of time. It's important. From Mike, Bigelow Aerospace has developed inflatable space habitats. They sure have, on contract with NASA. I'm not certain, but I believe that program was defunded before it was launched broadly. Are there any other similar inflatable or mobile space habitats that could eventually be used as an intermediary to support the logistics of getting supplies from the Earth to the moon in a more stepped and safe approach? And yes, absolutely, you are correct. There are inflatable habitats that's kind of a, inflatable habitat is exactly, that's like a pool inflatable habitat, and they like come real compact, and they might take them out to, the International Space Station, for example, or, Gateway, depending on whatever's going on with that. Aside from Bigelow, I'm not 100% sure where they're at. I know that some of them right now are currently, so they have them at Johnson, in where they have the International Space Station, all like a mock-up of it. They'll have some of the inflatable habitats, and they're currently used for like waste and stuff like that kind of like put them in there. But it could very well be, if they test and they're effective, then yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. It would be a smart way of taking habitats.
I don't know if this was great talk, by the way. I
Thank
don't know
you.
if this was covered, but do all the astronauts or the crew going on Artemis 2, would they have had to have had an analog experience as a prerequisite or early in their career?
Yeah, so my guess is that it would have happened. It's not necessarily like a prerequisite. The way that it would be selected is kind of real simplified. They would apply to be, part of the astronaut corps with NASA, or the Canadian Space Agency, and they would be selected as astronauts. They would go through their 2 years of training before being full-fledged astronauts. In those 2 years of training, part of it is doing missions like this, is doing analog missions. There's NASA has the habitats all over the world. They have some in Antarctica that they use. They have some, like I showed, in underwater. And a lot of the NASA astronauts, especially the one in the picture, those were all astronauts that had trained together and they had simulated that. So it's not really a requirement per se. It's part of their training. Like it's part of what they do to be able to get to where they're at. And this team has been working together for I don't even know how long. They seem like an incredible group of people. So excited to see them launch.
And this might be a bit of a more selfish question for me, but I've never been on a NASA social yet.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite one that you attended?
Oof, that's a hard one. They're
And
all, I
actually,
mean,
does
they're
everyone know what a NASA social is? We're getting a lot of no's, so if you could just
okay.
maybe, yes.
So yeah, so there's a couple different things. NASA will invite the media and they'll invite social media. So if you have it's not, I'm not going to say a large audience. Sometimes it is large audience. Typically, if you have content in social media, so Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, that you have like a varied audience. So a lot of my content actually started with greyhounds, and I applied to an NASA social, just like, I don't know, I like space. This seems cool. Let's do it. And I got waitlisted for it for the demo one NASA social in 2018. Never in a million years did I think I would be selected. I didn't. I got on the wait list and I was like, oh, cool. NASA looked at my stuff. Like, that's neat. And then I got off the wait list and that was my first one. So what they do is that they invite you out to the NASA Center, and as a social media creator, and they take you behind the scenes. They'll take you like meeting different scientists that are involved in the mission. If it's a crewed mission, you might get to go to crew walkout where they have like the doors, the famous doors that the astronauts come out. You'll go there and you'll get to see it. And yeah, and then you document it on social media and take it from there. So more recently, I have done media credentials. And so with Blue Marble Project, kind of shifted a little bit from doing social media to actual media. And so I do like photojournalism and articles with mental health and space. My favorite mission, honestly, I could not tell you. They all have incredible ones. I did one in Pasadena or in Palmdale rather. We got to go see Sophia, which is no longer, you might be familiar with, with astronomy, no longer in operation, with the telescope on the back of the 747. And that was unbelievable to walk in Sophia. We got to see Super Guppy out there. We got to go to Wallops was another one that I got. The Solar Orbiter, the Europa Clipper. I think the Europa Clipper might be up there because I had seen the Europa Clipper in High Bay One in the clean room at JPL before, and then seen them, seen it behind. And then that's something with NASA JPL that we'd kind of been following. And then to see it launch was just kind of a full circle moment. So, but they all have and the people there, they're incredible. You meet people from, still my friends after, I don't know how long,
Very
2018.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, last call for questions. Last call for questions on chat.
Yeah, so I'm glad. Thank you for having me out. So one last question, I think, do you have any suggestions on how the general public can best advocate for space science and exploration funding? Love it. And prioritization to the federal government, besides just writing our Congress representatives, are there any advocacy groups where a larger group of voices can make a difference? One of the things I can speak of is honestly the NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador Program. We have an incredible platform to be able to do that. Any kind of citizen science that you can do, any kind of presentations, like, I don't know if your involvement with the club, with like the Astronomical League, any of these programs that make people or help people see the value of it is a great way, right? More than kind of talking. I mean, yes, the representatives are a fantastic way. When you can get people to have the buy-in for why it's worth it, set up your telescope in the sidewalk, in your sidewalk, and like Halloween, have the spooky star party or something. You get people invested in it and they see it, and then it becomes personal. And that is a great way to start. And then, you can go up from there.
Not for nothing. One one of our most favorite outreach events is doing sidewalk astronomy, and we've been
Exactly.
very, very
Yeah.
lucky to be able to hit up a lot of the local libraries in
Mhm.
East Brunswick, surrounding East Brunswick as well. And we get such a huge turnout, and we get to talk to folks and really get them excited about it. So I agree
Yeah.
100%.
Keep doing that. That's a great way. You make it personal, then it's have a reason to care.
Wonderful. All
Mhm.
right. Well, with that, I'd like to say, Sharifi, thank you so very much. Not only have you presented to the club before last year, towards the end of the year, but you've agreed to come back and give us an update on your adventures and tie it into Artemis, which is very timely. So in a way, I'm kind of glad that they delayed it until April so that this could be
I figured
perfect
that.
timing for
Yeah.
us. But all that to say, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for giving the group a presentation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Uh, I'd like to get us outside as quickly as possible, so I'm gonna rush through these a little bit. I hope you don't mind. It is supposed to be clear. We'll go outside and take a look and make sure that that's still the case. We've gotten burned before, so fingers crossed. So, Jupiter should be right up ahead, overhead, I mean. The moon should be, I think we just had a new moon, so it's going to be pretty dark out there as long as it's clear. We'll make the best of it, and I think we'll point our telescopes to Jupiter. I'm not sure if Paul brought his sea star. Well, did you hear Sharifi uses her sea star? Yes. And we'll see what we're able to see. But if you look at the bottom right, I like this chart a lot because it just very easily shows you what's available in the night sky in terms of planets. So as you can see, I mean, it's really just Jupiter dominating the night tonight, right? It's going to be available. Venus, we probably missed it already or soon, but it'll be too close to the horizon for us to see anyway. Just really quickly, the last virtual UACNJ event that I saw on their website is on March 28th. It's a rerun that'll run live on their YouTube channel. So if you happen to tune in, great. They start at 8 o'clock. Pretty interesting stuff. But they will be opening up back again for their regular season. And from their website, I saw starting on the 4th of April, they're back for in-person public events at UACNJ in Jenny Jump State Forest near Hope, New Jersey. And typically the first presentation that they'll do in the month is this What's Up in the name of the month sky. If you haven't been to UACNJ, it's about an hour and a half out west, northwest. Beautiful, clear night skies. I really, really do recommend it. New Jersey Makers Day event at East Brunswick Public Library this Saturday. I think it's from 11 to 4. We'll be here talking about the telescope kits that this library has to lend out to its patrons. But we'll also have some other things that you can do. So come visit our table. There'll be other things as well that have to do with the whole maker movement. So 3D printers, woodworking I saw. There are tours of EBTV happening as well. So it'll be a good time. We're working on confirming the April presenter for our club meeting. But like I said earlier, follow us on social media, or if you haven't already, sign in, leave us your email, and we'll send you information just so you're in the know. This section we typically call our open discussions. We haven't really had anything in the last couple of meetings, but NEAF is coming up. Is everyone familiar with NEAF? NEAF stands for the Northeast Astronomy Forum and Space Expo. So it takes place at the Rockland Community College in Suffern, New Jersey. It's about maybe an hour and 40 minutes away from East Brunswick, but it's April 11th to the 12th, Saturday, Sunday. It is a ticketed event, but if you're really interested in astronomy, folks from all over go to this event. Take a look at the shiny new toys that are available, whether they're binoculars and really impressive wooden tripods for them, an observatory on a trailer we saw last year. So it's just a very interesting expo that you can go and look at all these different things. But if you do have questions, reach out. There's a couple of us that have gone before. So just ask us. A couple reminders, the next meeting on April 16th, a Thursday, of course, will start at 7:30. Now that daylight savings time has pushed the sundown time a little later, we start our meetings a little later to account for this. So from April to, I think, maybe August or September, 7:30 is our meeting time, unless it's a kids meeting. But again, take a look at the library's calendar to be sure that we're still meeting and what time. Follow us on social media and your email as well. And if you haven't already, we have convenient QR codes for Facebook on the left, Instagram on the right. So we do have a bit of excellent news to share. We just recently received our 501c3 status. We are officially a nonprofit now, meaning we'll be able to do bigger and better things. It's been a long journey to come here, but I'm really, really thankful and thrilled to have the team that we have here supporting the club and all the events that we have. We have a really strong board, and I'm very thankful for everyone's help. So if you're part of the board, just raise your hand, or part of the team, just raise your hand, just so everyone knows. These are the folks that help put these events together. Without it, I would have already torn out my hair and quit a couple years ago. We are only in our third year, so keep that in mind. Let's go outside.